Hey everyone, Rho here. Before we begin today, our next week's special is now on the horizon. Our week dedicated to the Primarch of the Salamanders. And I am looking forward to this one. So that's Monday the 29th of August. But with that said, on to today. Today we are ranking the enemies of mankind. Just who is the greatest threat to the Imperium's survival. No need for a spoiler warning today, so we are just going to jump straight in. As we all know, the 40k universe is called the Grim Dark for a very real reason. In that far future of the galaxy, there is only war. The Imperium of Man is beset by enemies on all sides. Every world must contribute to its survival. Whether through manpower or resources, all of them must pay their tithe to the Emperor of mankind. The Imperium's battle for survival is constant, now more than ever. However, of all the enemies that bestride the stars, which of them is the biggest threat? The Orcs, the Necrons, Tyranids? Well, that's what we're going to have a little fun discussing today. Now, obviously here we're talking from a lore perspective, and not the tabletop rules. And we're not focusing down into the individual characters or factions, such as particular hive fleets, orc clans or traitor legions. One, because we'd be here all day, and two, we can cover those in other discussions, like we have previously with the minor hive fleets. This discussion is more the factions as a whole, as really it's that scale that can only affect the Imperium's survival anyway. So, we've got the Tyranids, that includes the Genestealer cults, the Tau Empire, Drukhari, Craftworld Eldari, which I'm going to combine with the Ynnari, the Orcs, the Necrons, and lastly Chaos, the Ruinous Powers. And we'll do a ranking of the Traitor Legions in another upload. As always, before we begin, we're just having a little bit of fun here, and this ranking is just my opinion. All the Imperium's enemies are of course a huge threat in their own right. Whether you agree or disagree, drop your thoughts and own rankings in the comments below. So without further ado, coming in 7th place as the least biggest threat in my opinion, we have the Drukhari. Now, I would be very surprised if many people have the Drukhari near the top of their lists. For me, they've always been more a thorn in the Imperium side than any huge danger, focusing more on surprise raids than any real attempt at conquest. The Drukhari have a few nice advantages behind them, such as being hidden amongst the dark reaches of the webway, away from the majority of the threats of the galaxy. The fabled city of Commorragh, a dark beacon of sin. Having a mastery of the webway that only the Harlequins can beat, the Drukhari can appear virtually anywhere within the Imperium on a moment's notice. So there's probably no other faction within the galaxy that can match them in this capacity. Even their Craftworld cousins would struggle to match their darker kin's excellence in this area. The Drukhari also have a mastery of dark sciences, something that's become the envy of the darker parts of the Imperium and Chaos alike. The likes of Fabius Bile have been instructed within Commorragh's dark walls, and even the Mechanicum is said to have bartered with this faction, in their desperate attempts to repair the Golden Throne. So yeah, while I may have the Drukhari at bottom of my ranking, there is no doubt they absolutely have some big advantages going for them. The problem for them though, in my opinion, is, well, really a few things. Firstly, the Drukhari suffer from the same problem as the rest of their race. Their numbers. They are all that's left from the fall of the Eldar Empire, the birth of Slaanesh that consumed most of their race. They simply don't have the numbers to be a big enough threat to confront the Imperium head on. In an all-out war for survival, the Imperium would easily overwhelm the Drukhari, through sheer force of numbers alone. Secondly, it's that birth of Slaanesh that's the very reason why the Drukhari are hiding in the first place. They are terrified of she who thirsts. With the fall of Cadia, the Imperium is unleashed like never before, which, while the resultant confusion and anarchy may be good for the Drukhari raids, having the forces of the ruinous powers able to manifest like never before is not. The demons of Slaanesh can hunt the Eldari across the galaxy. That is not something the Drukhari need or want. With that in mind, they'll absolutely be focused on quick and fast raids more than ever. And lastly, in what's a bit of a recurring theme for many of the factions here, they simply aren't unified enough. Yes, Vect is essentially the de facto leader of the Drukhari. However, the cabals of the Drukhari are constantly at war with one another. Alliances chop and change on a daily basis, with one cabal betraying the other. Far from wanting to unify his people, it's actually this constant infighting that enables Vect to retain control, manipulating any possible competitors into war with another rival. While Vect retains control of Commorragh, the Drukhari will never be a truly unified faction. And honestly, it's probably just part of their nature to not be. So for me, the Drukhari deservedly open up our rankings. They can be deadly when they choose to be, but they just don't bring enough to the table to be a true large-scale threat. Moving on, next we have the Tau Empire. Now this was a real tough one, and I can absolutely understand why many people will have the Tau further up. There's no two ways about it here, they are one of the very few factions actively growing, and growing at a fairly substantial rate. They have a lot going for them here, a very impressive array of technology. The Tau can bring a formidable amount of firepower to the battlefield, something that can easily overwhelm whatever faction opposes them. Even the Imperium of Man struggles to contest a firefight with the Tau. They also have the philosophy of the greater good, which is proving to be particularly adept at swaying Imperial worlds to their cause. And that's something I think gets far too often overlooked. They actually use diplomacy. For every world they can bring into their empire, without having to drain their resources, it becomes a very big addition. So vast is the Imperium, so overwhelmingly slow is its communication, that many of the worlds the Tau encounter are already feeling abandoned by the Imperium and their Emperor. Far from seeing a hostile alien, they find a loving saviour. Now the truth may be slightly different beneath, but by the time they realise that, it's too late. The caste system employed by the Tau enables a form of stability and autonomy that quite simply the Imperium can never match. It also by and large keeps the Empire free from the aspects of power and greed that blights other factions. If both empires were equivalently sized, you could well say the Tau would defeat the Imperium rather handedly. However, therein lies the problem. They aren't the same size. In fact, David versus Goliath would be an understatement. For all the Tau Empire's growth, it is still minuscule compared to the might of the Imperium. They simply do not contend anywhere near enough threat at this moment in time. I remember back in the Psychic Awakening campaign, when we saw the short story of a Death Guard fleet approaching the Tau Empire, and it genuinely felt like this could be the end of the Tau as we knew it. Obviously we knew that wasn't going to happen, but that's how much of a threat a single traitor legion felt to their empire. You simply can't compare the Tau and the Imperium at this moment in time. Their threat is growing, but compared to the other factions out there, there are far bigger enemies to worry about first. Moving on, next we have the Eldari. Now for this I have combined the Craft Worlds and the Ynnari, as honestly they are pretty much intertwined now anyway. Now I can immediately hear the questions of how can I have the Eldari over the Tau, when they are most likely an even smaller population than them. Well, yes, they most likely are. But for me, the Eldari's psychic ability is the defining factor here. Yes, the Eldar are far from their former glory. The once galaxy-spanning empire is now reduced to ruin. However, for all their declined power, the fact is the Eldari can still manipulate galaxy-defining events. Their ability to predict the tides of fate gives them a huge advantage over every other faction. No one can match their ability with foresight. The Eldar can see and act on a fate-altering situation before anyone else even knows what's going on. And that can be absolutely pivotal in any military campaign. When you combine that with their use of the webway, able to traverse the galaxy in mere moments, that's a couple of very distinct advantages. Comparatively speaking, the slow and cumbersome Imperium could never match that kind of maneuverability or coordination. There is also the prospect of the awakening Ennead, the god of death the Eldari are hoping to bring into being. If this prophecy can be fulfilled, removing the ever-present threat of Slaanesh, there is the possibility that rather than a gradual slide into oblivion, the Eldari fortunes can be reversed, that once more they could look into the future with hope. Now they may want to try and come up with another solution to bring about its birth than all of their deaths, but hey ho, you gotta do what you gotta do. And technically an awakening god is a tick in the advantage column. Individually the Ynnari aren't a threat to anyone, that's why I have them combined with the Craft Worlds. And from a story perspective it is appearing to be moving in that general direction, with more and more cooperation and interaction between the two. On a galaxy scale, for me, we're still very much in the area where factions can't truly pose much of a threat to the Imperium. Even Guilliman himself has told Eldrad's representative that they continue to exist only by his allowance. If they wanted to snuff out what's left of their race, they could. But through that psychic mastery, the added advantage of the webway and a possibly awakening god, I certainly think the Eldari could give the Imperium more headaches than not. So for that reason I have the Eldari above the Tau Empire. Now from here on out, this is where it begins to get interesting. The ante is most definitely upped. Every faction from here on out, if the situation turned out right, could represent a genuine threat to the Imperium's survival. This was a tough one, but next up I've gone with the Orcs. Now part of me wants to have the greenskins much higher on the list, I mean, they exist for nothing other than war. It was the very reason they were created. It doesn't matter how tough the conflict, they simply aren't going anywhere. And in fact, the harder the fighting, the more they enjoy it. The more forces you bring to bear, the more the orcs are going to keep on turning up. When you have that kind of philosophy, it makes the orcs possibly the greatest threat of all. And even if you win, you aren't guaranteed they won't return. Entire worlds have survived orc wars, only to then become overrun a few years later, as the spores left behind unleash a new wave of orc menace. The orcs are literally anywhere and everywhere across the galaxy. There is not a sector where they are not present. They are an infestation that simply cannot be cleansed. So how can they not be further up the rankings? Well, for me, quite simply, it's their complete and utter lack of unity. The orcs are as likely to fight each other as they are somebody else. They don't care where the fight is, as long as there is one. It's built into their very identity. They just exist to fight. For all their genetic ability to cause destruction, unless it's guided, unified, they can never pose the threat that they should. Now, we do of course have a certain Ghazghkull Thraka, leading his wars across the galaxy. However, if we're honest, as of yet he hasn't represented anywhere near as big of a threat as he should. In some ways, he perfectly represents the orc race as a whole. A major threat, but one that could be so much more. Sure, the system of Armageddon is infamously tied to his name, but we're talking the entire Imperium here, not simple systems or even subsectors. And it has to be said, Ghazghkull was decapitated by Ragnar Blackmane. That's hardly a threat worthy of Guilliman. The orcs nearly had the Imperium on its knees during the era of the Beast. If one such orc could reach that point of evolution again, if Ghazghkull himself can continue to evolve into a prime orc, truly gathering together all of the orc race beneath his banner, then the orcs represent a very real threat to the Imperium. They vault all the way to the top of this list. However, at the moment, it simply doesn't look like it's on the cards. Yes, Ghazghkull's wars get ever bigger, but it just feels like there's a long way to go until we reach that point, unless we see a major development within the lore. So for me, the orcs can't be any higher on my rankings. Now, moving on into our top 3, we have the Necrons. I have a lot of love for the Necrons. They are probably my favourite Xeno faction. The Imperium is founded on the sleeping remnants of the Infinite Empire, largely unaware of the threat slumbering beneath their feet. The galaxy once belonged to the Necron tier, and if they have their way, it will do so again. The Necrons have quite a few advantages going for them. Their mechanical bodies remove any semblance or restriction of time. To the Necrons, it doesn't matter if a campaign lasts 1 year or 1 century. As long as they come out the victor, that is all that matters. It also means that they don't suffer the need for supplies that all the so-called lesser races do. The reliance on such menial things as food. This mechanical advantage also means they can walk through wounds and damage that would otherwise kill a body of flesh and bone. They have a mastery of technology the Mechanicum can only dream of. The Necrons quite simply are a level above, and when you combine that to the fact that they now have the returned Silent King, the supreme ruler of their entire race, they become a truly Imperium-ending threat. So why aren't they top of the list? Well, for me, two reasons. First of all, most of their race is still slumbering within the tombs. For all the ever-growing conquests of the Necrons, the fact is we have only just begun to see the beginning of the Great Awakening. This is merely the start of the Necrons' emergence. When they truly begin to awaken in full scale, then it could well be game over. However, the awakening will not be immediate. It takes a long time for a tomb world to begin the process, and that's assuming it has survived the centuries without damage. So it's not like one day the Necron Empire will all be up and ready to go. It's a gradual, ever unwinding process. To me, it's like a steam engine with the coal being shoved into the engine, gradually firing that furnace and building up the momentum until it reaches full speed. For me, there are larger, more immediate threats out there. Now, secondly, as much as a threat as the Necrons are right now, much like many of the other races, they are just as divided as they are unified. The Silent King may be back, but he has yet to truly re-establish his control. Many dynasties out there are still independent, oblivious to their returned king, the most notable of which is the Sortek dynasty, the rule of Imhotep the Stormlord. If Sarek had managed to get Imhotep on side, the Necrons could perhaps already top this ranking, with the Sortek being by far and away the most numerous and powerful dynasty. However, Imhotep at this time has absolutely no intention of bending the knee, and if anything, seeks to place himself as the new Silent King. Until this conflict is ended, with one or the other coming out victorious, the Necrons can't reach their true potential. So for me, they have to land in third. Now the final two, and possibly a bit controversially, in second, I have the ruinous powers. Chaos. Yes, the gods of chaos are the ultimate enemy of mankind. Yes, the dark gods feed on the very emotions of every sentient race out there. However, for me, they have as many flaws as they do advantages. Chaos is, by its very nature, its own worst enemy. The dark whispers of chaos will always be a temptation to the weakness of man. In the fears and doubts of mankind, chaos will always be lurking, tempting and pulling the weak, corrupt, frightened to its sway. On every world within the Imperium, the possibility of a chaos cult is there. Even Holy Terror itself has found chaos in its shadows. In such a situation, what hope can there be for the galaxy? In this new age of the cicatrix maledictum, with demons now able to manifest with ever-growing ease, what hope is still left? Originally, I had Chaos split into two factions. The Ruinous Powers, as in the Dark Gods and their minions, and then the Traitor Astartes. And the reason I did this was because it felt like to me the Astartes are far more responsible for the success that Chaos has had than, well, the Dark Gods themselves. But honestly, the two are so intertwined it just makes sense to keep them together, because you can't have one without the other. If it wasn't for the manipulations of Chaos, the Traitor Astartes would never have come to be in the first place. Now, given the current state of the galaxy, you'd have to say that Chaos is the most present threat, which in many ways would make them the greatest. Abaddon caused the destruction of Cadia. Without his planning and actions, the traitor legions would still be largely bound to the Eye of Terror. The forces of the ruinous powers would be far more limited to their appearances and actions. With the fall of Cadia, the Imperium and the galaxy fell to the prey of the ruinous powers, half of which is still left within darkness. The traitor Primarchs emerged once more into the galaxy, attempting to claim new empires in the name of their patrons. And Khorne himself launched an assault upon the throne world of Terra. It's undeniable the level of threat that Chaos represents, and it's a greater threat now than it's ever been before. At least not since the Siege of Terra at the climax of the Heresy. From demons to cultists, to renegade chapters to traitor legions, the forces of Chaos are almost limitless, able to truly rival the Imperium in scope. Again, when it's the very heart of its own people in question, the Imperium can never truly class itself as safe. However, the one very real reason I can't place Chaos at that top spot is that very same recurring theme. They simply aren't unified. The Chaos Gods simply can't help themselves. They return to the great game every time. In all honesty, it's always more their attention than the material world ever is. They are ever jealous of their brothers' victories, seeking to stab them in the back. Only the Emperor of Mankind has ever held their genuine attention and fear. As Mortarion and Nurgle neared victory within Ultramar, Tzeentch invaded his captured realm of the Scourge Stars, forcing Nurgle to withdraw his forces to fight off his brother's invasion. Thus it could be said costing Mortarion his victory. And this is the perfect example of how Chaos constantly shoots itself in the foot. They just can't remain unified for any length of time, all the while constantly scheming and plotting on how to exploit each other. And it permeates every single aspect of the faction, because again, that is the very nature of Chaos. For me, honestly, I don't think you can say Abaddon achieved his milestone victory because of the ruinous powers. I think he achieved it despite them. And when you take away Abaddon's recent destruction of Cadia, just what monumental victory have the ruinous powers achieved since the Heresy? For me, honestly, I think you have to say none. The Imperium, albeit stagnated, had actually pretty easily survived, and you can probably say it was the Orcs and Tyranids who had pushed it closest to destruction. Since the fall of Cadia, has Chaos pushed on from this victory? Did they remain unified and push on to the throne world? No. It really feels like Chaos should have far more capitalized on the situation. There's no way Guilliman and the Imperium should have been able to stabilize the Imperium Sanctus. Yet they did. Abaddon the Despoiler continues in his planning. The traitor Primarchs all pursue their own agendas, and the Dark Gods once more fight amongst themselves. If this ranking was for individuals, then Abaddon would possibly top the list. But collectively, Chaos as a whole, all its actions of course make a grave threat to the Imperium's survival. That's why I have them in second place, but it's simply not unified for long enough to capitalize on its achievements. If the gods of Chaos could just work together more, get their Primarchs and servants in line, they could win. But they just can't do it. And so for me, despite the success that Chaos has had, I rank the Tyranids as the greatest threat to the Imperium's survival. Alone of every faction in this ranking, the Tyranids are the only one absolutely unified. The hive mind controls and dominates the entire species. When a hive fleet emerges from the galactic rim into the Imperium, it has been nothing short of an absolute catastrophe. Entire systems are gone in the blink of an eye. Space Marine chapters have been slain, defending their homes. Entire systems have been destroyed by the Imperium themselves, just in an attempt to slow the progress of the Tyranids. And the hive fleets simply won't stop. So far, 3 major hive fleets have emerged into the galaxy, and with each one the threat has only grown. Every time the Tyranids penetrating ever further into the heart of the Imperium, and every one has truly been classified as a major threat to the Imperium's survival. That is saying something. The last fleet only stopped by the combined force of the entire lineage of Sanguinius, and even then, they nearly lost. In fact, truthfully they would have, if Guilliman and his Indomitus fleet had not arrived. That was essentially the Hive fleet going up against the Legion of old, and they had victory within their grasp. And that's just the major fleets. Countless minor Hive fleets are still roaming Imperium territory, harvesting and absorbing worlds as they go, almost overlooked by the Imperium due to the sheer terror the larger ones represent. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of all concerning the Tyranids is their evolution to every threat and tactic they face. Always learning and evolving, the Tyranids are becoming ever harder for the Imperium to stop. And with half the Imperium's resources now lost, stuck within the darkness of the Imperium Nihilus, the next Hive fleet that emerges could truly be too much. What we have seen so far is just the tip of the iceberg. The scouts of the Tyranid race only beginning to emerge. The main bulk is still to come. Unlike the Necrons that will be a gradual awakening, the next Hive fleet could literally arrive at any moment. It possibly already could have. The shadow of the warp preventing any word of warning escaping. It's one of the most frightening aspects of the Tyranids. They don't announce their intentions. They don't taunt or send warning. They instinctively and mercilessly harvest world after world. With the trend of each Hive fleet only ever growing stronger, more evolved, the next Tyranid arrival truly represents an Imperium-ending threat. It would have before the Great Rift tore the Imperium asunder. Now, it's an absolute certainty. And that's with the assumption only one major Hive fleet continues to emerge at a time. What if it's 2? 3? If 2 major Hive fleets emerged at the same time? Honestly, realistically, that's a doomsday scenario for the Imperium. What if it's a Hive fleet magnitudes larger than anything seen yet? It would take the combined might of all of Guilliman's Indomitus fleets to counter. And can the Imperium even spare that kind of force from the rest of its war zones? For me, the more you think about the Tyranids, the more you can't help but realise how terrifying a prospect they truly are. For me, the Tyranids absolutely deserve their place as the Imperium's greatest threat. They make the Imperium's survival, heck, the galaxy's survival, not a question, but a countdown. But as always everyone, what do you think? This is just my opinion. And what is yours? Which faction do you think is the Imperium's greatest threat? Where do you agree or disagree with me? Don't forget to leave your rankings in the comments below. As always, huge thank you to all my subscribers. Your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then don't forget to drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.